Well, hi, everybody. My name is Judy Utall, and I am the head of the Autism and Entertainment Work Group. And welcome today to our webinar, Screen Acting for Autistic Performers. Just a little bit of background. The Autism and Entertainment Work Group is about increasing employment for work-ready autistic talent in the entertainment industry. We had a conference back in April, and it was just magnificent. What we want to do is have, Hollywood's very focused on diversity. We want them to be including neurodiversity in the diversity movement. We want them to see the autism brand as a strong brand for talented skills. Right now, it's positively looked at in high tech, and we think it should be the same in entertainment. There are a lot of resources, government resources, that can make hiring a person on the spectrum or cost effective or tools to help them. And we want to make people, both the talent and the employers, know about those. And then we want to help people on the spectrum navigate their careers. And that's part of the motivation behind this particular webinar. Just a little bit, I saw someone wanted to record. We're recording this session, and we will have it available on the Autism and Entertainment YouTube channel. And also, if you've registered for this event, we will send you an email when that recording is available. I've turned on live transcriptions, so you can see the words of what people are saying. And then finally, use the chat function to ask your questions. I'm going to be communicating with Britt to let him know when there are questions. I just want to welcome you again, and I wanted to tell you just a little bit about this particular webinar. Britton Payne is a business affair attorney at Nickelodeon. He found out about the conference, and he's been really supportive. And he offered this summer to put together 3 webinars, which this is one of them. He's a off-time speaker at Comic-Con, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from him. At the very end, I'm going to do a quick poll, so stay on for another minute or two at the end to participate in that poll. And it looks like everybody is spotlighted, so I'm going to remove my spotlight and let you get started. Hi, Britt.
Hi, Judy, and thank you so much for that introduction. Really glad to be a part of this Autism Entertainment panel with Rick Glassman and Kayla Cromer and Alex Plank. Each of them will have a chance to introduce themselves and talk in a sec, but I wanted to start with my perception of the timeline of an acting project of the kind that we're talking about, screen acting. So I work at Nickelodeon, which is part of Paramount, and I have a particular position where I can see the timeline of how a project comes together. So I just kind of want to start with that. The project doesn't just start when you walk in the room and audition. It starts well before. The first part is, there are many different ways things can happen too. This is a timeline, but it has some commonalities that I think will be helpful to just hear about. One is the acquisition of the intellectual property, whether that means somebody gets an idea and writes a script, or they acquire a book that's pre-existing and adapt it into a script, or some other process. But it's figuring out what's the creative kernel at the heart of the whole thing. And then typically a producer of some kind or another, whether it's a big company like Paramount or an individual, will pitch it, whether that's internal or from outside, pitching it to a company like Paramount. And if it's a project that goes forward, the studio picks it up. They essentially buy the rights or buy an option to make a project. The studio then, and again, there are many, many ways this can happen. This is sort of the studio system. The studio will develop the script. They will kick it around. They'll buy a rewrite. They'll maybe hire a different writer. And then eventually, once the script is solid and the plan is put together, they budget the project to see how much it would cost. They pitch it internally to essentially some big boss, who then gives it what's called a green light. That means the project is going forward. So that means that they've approved the creative and they've approved the budget and the schedule. And schedule is basically the same as budget. Once they have a green light, many things start into process, but the part for the purposes of our meeting today that starts is casting. That means there's typically a casting director at Nickelodeon. It's an internal casting director who puts together a breakdown, for example, of every part that's in the project. A breakdown is a description of each role, and then that gets sent out externally to maybe other casting directors or agents or managers, or maybe even they're targeting particular talent. And that's how they figure out who is going to submit. And then from there, either people submit by video or they come in person, or if it's a known quantity, they just start trying to negotiate, saying, we know we want this person and we don't need them to come in and audition or read or try out. So then once the roles are set, then you get into pre-production, which is costume fittings and testing location, finding locations, testing locations. And once that's all set, you start principal photography, which is usually measured in weeks. So it'll be for a television show, it might be 1 week. For a made-for-TV movie, it might be 6 weeks. And those can vary a lot depending on what budget people have. That's the part where everybody's on set. Everybody shows up. When live action, which is going to be different than in animation, essentially everybody has to be there at the same time so they can make this project, whatever it is. Then at the end of principal photography, sometimes there are a couple of what they call post days where you have to stick around and make up for things that you maybe missed earlier, or if there was a rain day, it gives you a little extra room. Then you get into post-production, which is editing. So now you're starting to put the thing together, you do the color correction, you add in the music. And then at some point, the project is done. It's in the can and it's essentially ready to be released. Right around then is when there's a publicity push. A lot of times you'll see a movie has a budget of $50 million, and then they spend another $50 million promoting it. So that's when you see a billboard or an interview with Ryan Reynolds or something like that. That's the publicity part, which the actors are contractually expected to be a part of. Then there's the release. That's when you think of the red carpet and the premiere. There isn't always a red carpet or a premiere party, but that's sort of the moment. That's when you say, this Friday is when we're going to see the first episode of, Good Doctor season 7, or when we're going to see the film get released publicly, or even just when your episode is going to air. But then there's something called windowing, which is where it appears first in, let's say, the movie theater, and then it appears on pay-per-view on HBO or Amazon Prime, and then eventually it goes to NBC where you can see it for free. It also gets windowed around the world at different times. All of those different times, actors might be expected to promote the project, to do an interview or a junket or a tweet or something. Hey, now you can see our project on Amazon Prime. And then there's ancillary services. If it's a certain kind of a project, ancillary services are kind of our other. So if there's a plush doll that comes out and you press its belly and it says some catchphrase from a movie, an actor might be asked to perform on those kinds of projects, or subsequent promotions, or a Happy Meal, that has some kind of commercial. You might be asked to be a part of that. So that's sort of the timeline of a project, and where actors might be expected to contribute services. So I kind of wanted to, the big part of all this seems to be the audition. I suspect that's the actor's first initiation to a project, when they receive the breakdown and they audition. So I wanted to ask Kayla and Rick, what can you describe your process when you first find out about a project? How do you find out? So Rick, do you want to go first? When a new project comes down, how do you find out about it?
I mean, I don't know how to answer that without complaining. I find out in two ways. The first way is somebody tells me they're auditioning for something. I heard through somebody that this is a thing, or like I'll see an announcement for a show. I saw an announcement. I did a show with Jason Katims called As We See It, and I saw the announcement for it because I have variety things. I just get them in my email, and I always just look what things are. Whenever I see something that's interesting, I'll send it to, I don't have an agent. I'll send it to my manager, and I'll say, hey, and then sometimes my manager will say, hey, here's something. But like, I don't really audition that much. So most of the stuff I end up doing is from, I think when you work, one of the best things about working is you get to do that project, but then you meet people. And typically it's people that I've met, that I've worked with before, that I'm friends with, that they're the ones that tell me that, and then I go in and I audition for them.
How about you, Kayla? How do you find out about a project?
Well, in terms of auditions, I get them from both my agent and my manager for both on camera and for voiceover. Other than that, I look on IMDb Pro to see if there's anything upcoming, and if it has interest, I usually do a mass email to my team once a month of all the different projects that are upcoming that I could see myself doing, so they could be on the lookout for. But other than that, it's mainly all through my agents and managers.
Yeah. And so then when you get a script, typically when you audition for something, you might get a couple of pages of the script or a summary of the script or a summary of the project. You're reading it, and often you are looking at it as an autistic actor. And as an actor, it's not your job to rewrite a script, but sometimes there may be changes you think are necessary, either to help your performance due to the particular expression of your autism, or to address problematic language or ideas concerning autism. Rick and Kayla, what is an example of a time you advocated to the writers to a change of script because of autism?
For a project, I had a line in one of the episodes rephrased from all people with autism to some people with autism. So it didn't want the line to stereotype every single person with autism has this certain struggle. And that would just make people upset. Some people doesn't stereotype every person with autism. So I just thought that would be more better for the autism community, instead of saying all people with autism have a particular thing.
How did they respond to that?
Oh, they were fine. They said, oh my goodness, we didn't even realize that. And they changed it within a few seconds. Within a few hours, we had the new script revision and it was changed. It was not a problem.
How about you, Rick?
I sometimes will have conversations with, which this isn't necessarily the case if you're coming in as a weekly player or as a guest star. You might not have this luxury. I have only had experience where I was one of the regulars on the show, and I guess I felt more comfortable doing this. But I would speak with like the last show I was on was called Not Dead Yet, and the character has autism, and for my own reasons, not for moral reasons as much, but just like for sustainability. Like I had a conversation where there's like the obstacles that I face in my life that are in part two or that are have to do with autism were a lot more dramatic when I was younger. And as an adult, I've found ways of adapting. And when I've played a character on the autism spectrum that I didn't connect with personally, which is fine. That's what we do as actors. But then I wanted to be able to be the type of autistic, and I don't know if I'm saying this right, but the type of autistic that I connect with more on a daily level, the type of obstacles that maybe are unseen to other people, or the things that I've learned to deal with when I'm home, and when I'm outside, I'll just get drained really fast and not acknowledge them. And I've asked, and our show creators were great about it, but I asked if we don't have to make everything about autism, because I don't know what is autism and what is my own neuroses and my own stomach aches and my own life experiences. I just know if somebody comes in my house with our outdoor clothes, I need to put a blanket down. I don't know if that's autism. I don't think it is, but I mean, I'm sure it's related to it. So when there's autism language, I often ask them to make it about the character, not about autism. And within that, when there are certain things that like have to deal with my obstacles, however you would define them, if it isn't specific to story and it's more specific to character, I'll often say, hey, I'm more this way. I just think it's better for my performance. On an episode of the show I did called As We See It, my character was supposed to be anxious before finding out something that was part of the story. And I was sitting in a waiting room, and I have a very hard time with certain sounds, especially eating sounds. So I asked if they could have somebody sitting next to me eating a bag of chips. And my thought was, at first it was like, hey, this is something I want to draw attention to, so my dad doesn't think I'm an asshole. Pardon my language. Every time I say, "Dad, stop." But also like it helped my performance. It helped me like be able to be anxious, and like something that's been really fun about doing these things is finding things that I used to be ashamed of and I'm now either okay with or slightly embarrassed by, or things that are obstacles. And instead of seeing them as these things that people are going to make fun of or be annoyed by, to be able to tell them in a story and like the opposite feeling, like, oh wow, if I could get really upset about this thing, then I will be validated as a performer. So like finding stories where I could use what feel like obstacles as part of the character kind of is validating.
And so that's an amazing story. That's really interesting. And how well is that received in your experience?
I mean, I want to limit my words because this is such a big part of my life now. I was diagnosed as an adult, and it wasn't until then that I realized that the way I was communicating wasn't working for other people. I never knew that. And I've since learned a lot of tools on a lot of the problems of the way I was communicating. It was either being misunderstood or not meeting other people's expectations. And the meeting people's expectations, there's an easier shortcut to that. I do this with every new director with a TV show, especially like a lot of times, every episode is a new director. So even if you're on the show a lot, they don't know you. And I tell them beforehand, so it's not making demands, but more giving them like tools on how they could help me and help the project. I'll say whatever I feel the obstacle might be. Hey, I'm having a difficult time connecting with this. Hey, I'm feeling pretty anxious about this. Hey, this wardrobe I can't wear this wardrobe. But instead of just telling the wardrobe department, I can't wear this, it's uncomfortable, to set expectations of, I have certain textures, certain sounds affect me in a way that is distracting, and I want to be as efficient as I can in this production. If things come up, even before they do, if things come up, is there a certain person I could talk to, or is there a certain time that I could ask things of you? And once they realize that I found every single time, once somebody who we're all on a team together trying to make this thing better, once people realize that I'm not making demands or being difficult, as though it could be seen as that, but more so I'm asking for help, and people like helping, people want to help, people don't want to feel controlled or manipulated. So finding a way of framing, hey, I need your help doing better, as opposed to, hey, you need to do this for me. It's always received well. I feel very connected and close to people with that. I was on a show with one of the actresses who lovely woman. She smells fantastic. She wears a lot of perfume, and I might as well not know how to read a script if I'm around perfume. So be able to have a conversation with somebody of explaining, not that you smell horrible, but I can't deal with this stuff. When we have scenes together, is there any way you could maybe spray it and walk in instead of spraying it on your neck? I've gotten really comfortable asking things of people because they receive it well. Also, pardon me for talking too long about that.
Good. No, that's great. That's great. Alex, I wanted to loop you in. So hearing this, Alex, you are, among other things, an autism consultant. I just would love it if you'd explain in practical terms, what does that mean? And then from having just heard from Kayla and Rick, how does their experience comport with what you've seen as an autism consultant on other projects?
Sure, yeah. And, generally, my role nowadays is more of a producer. It's something yeah, well, it's just trying to be accurate. But, yeah, I mean, I agree with the thing about the blanket. All autistic people do that, actually.
Oh, really?
Oh, sorry, that was a joke based on what you said and what Kayla had said about all autism. Sorry. But I think that like it is. I really loved what Rick just said about making it real, because from my work, I've always come across a sort of desire, especially in writers, that I mean, there's two different types of writers. There's the writer that's has a family member who's autistic, who then sort of writes the script based on the lens of like their experience as a brother of someone who's autistic or a sister of someone who's autistic. And I think that comes with a whole set of issues where you're taking out the point of view of the autistic person even more than if you didn't have anyone that you knew that was autistic in a way, because it's through your point of view as knowing someone who's autistic, and it's more about your, the other characters reacting. Now, there's another element of someone who has no experience, and generally that's like what Kayla sort of mentioned, which is this tendency to sort of find the Wikipedia article about autism and then go through the little list of all the things that they do and try to put that in every scene. Like, it doesn't, as Rick said, it doesn't have to be about, it's about a person. I mean, and when you're trying to make a show for a general audience or a movie that's going to be watched by people, you should make it about human issues that we all go through. And when I work on a project, a movie, a show, one of my biggest goals is trying to get everyone on board with sort of using, if in terms of autism, these are things that we all go through, and a lot of times your ability to talk about what's bothering you in a way that's like so transparent is something that could actually help sort of expose an issue that everyone goes through but doesn't ever talk about, and so it's like it can actually be used in a way that like makes it more powerful for everyone watching, because like often is the case for me that I come in and the script's sort of like, okay, well, this is like about this guy's effect on your life and how he's like it's almost like the autistic guy's the obstacle to you being happy, or to your marriage, or to your ability to be independent. I don't know, like there's like all these things that they sort of we often get propped up as being an obstacle or a sort of vehicle for another character to discover something about themselves. But oftentimes, well, almost all the time, we don't really get our own stories told in a way that's authentic to ourselves. So my goal is sort of, especially with producing like a movie or something, is to get a story told that's like true to the actor who's doing it, because ultimately, like if you're autistic and you're an actor, like Rick said, there's going to be things that you do that are going to be more authentic on screen. Like maybe that says in the script, oh, he stims by rocking, but you don't rock. I mean, like you don't really need to write the stims in, because that's like the natural reaction an actor has. And an actor who isn't autistic isn't going to have every little like minute thing that they do with their hands. Like, they don't tell Matthew Lillard to like, twiddle a pencil in his hand or something, or do whatever weird thing he's doing in each scene that he's in.
Yeah, and these are really interesting answers about the work that as an actor, and specifically an autistic actor, that you bring to the roles that can flesh out a script or a project in a way that maybe the other people on a project aren't quite able to, or even that if they were well-intentioned, even if the writer and the director are autistic, it isn't until they've really brought you in that you get to contribute as an actor in more than just saying the lines right, but also sharing your experience and sharing your character. And I think it's great that you guys have had these experiences where you're able to contribute in that way. Differently, something else that Rick hit on were particular accommodations that he might ask for that will help get his best performance. So I'm curious, like for example, Kayla, have you ever had issues with a set environment because of your autism where you requested an accommodation, and how did you handle it?
No, I haven't actually. My parents raised me to deal with different environments, and that was an amazing foundation for me to build upon. And I just find that direct and open communication from pre-production and moving forward to filming is the key for me.
Yeah, and it sounds like that's what has worked for you, Rick. You've said something different where you are comfortable asking for accommodations. What have you? Go ahead.
Again, I don't know. It's not specific to autism. This is going to sound like a joke, and I'm being silly, but like I'm Jewish, and I grew up in a house where we complain and we want things a certain way, and it's too hot, and I'm hungry, and I'm bored, and you just say what you're thinking. So there are times where like, yeah, I just when I want something a certain way, if I feel it doesn't affect anybody else in a negative way, I am a huge advocate of asking for things. I also love to help people and to bring value wherever I can. But like if there's something I want, whether it's work or like me testing my microphones and asking you guys, could you give me 30 seconds to figure this out? I don't know. That's just a safe space for me.
And you're
And
not
I
afraid of
will
somebody
also
saying no?
What's I have no, but somebody's no, like I don't want to feel responsible for other people's feelings. To me, as long as I am coming from a place of from kindness, and which I am, and except for if I have my blind spots. But like if there's something I ask of you and you don't want to do it, I don't want to not ask you out of fear you'll say no, but I also am not going to get triggered by you denying it. I also think if you bring it up, now you know you have the option of saying no, but it might not be a big deal to you. I've also found that by me doing that, it has given other people the permission to do the same. I give notes to directors. I've done this almost every time for the past 5 years. I say, I won't necessarily, I've learned that a lot of directors or showrunners will speak to their actors in a way protecting their ego, because sometimes that's necessary as actors and as humans, I guess. But I've seen people like say stuff to people and then not get what they want out of them. I was on a TV show, it was a multicam, and I was friends with the writer. So there were times where I saw people lose jokes because the writers didn't want to give them a line read or explain it. And so I've asked directors saying, hey, if there's something you want of me, you have to, I would love if you would just tell me directly. Like, hey, that was really good. Could we maybe try it this way? If you don't like what I'm doing, tell me, because if you say, oh, this was really good, I'll like keep that in mind and try to do those things. So like by me saying what I want, it also, I have found it helps other people, or it makes other people feel safer with me to tell me what they want. And I need people to be like, don't do this, do this, if they have that opinion. And because I like to receive it, I speak it.
Yeah, I think that's really true. The empathy that's needed to accommodate anybody with anything. If somebody is the one to step forward and sort of say it's okay to ask for things, then maybe other people who need different things also feel okay about asking for things. Alex, at what point in the process do you talk about accommodations with autistic performers on projects that you work on, even if it's before they come on board?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I really push for in setting up a set to be a good environment is accommodation for and awareness of what autism is, how to talk to autistic actors. One of the biggest obstacles I found is that they want to tiptoe around it with like the autistic actor and not like tell them what they need to tell them for them to be able to do their job, right? So like it's also like this like thing that a friend of mine calls hey buddy, like where it's like they like have this like, oh well you're special, like I have to talk to you different, like, which is really offensive obviously. But you think you're talking, if they talk to you like you're a kid. So we hold meetings, and I get everyone department, usually it's head of departments, but sometimes we'll also have the crew on. Like I just did one with like 20 crew members as well as the heads of department yesterday, and we went through and just the biggest thing I talked to is be direct, say what you mean, because we don't read between the lines. I mean I found though that on the sets that was implemented, that it seems like people are like, this is one of the nicest sets I've ever worked on. Which I mean obviously people say on every set, but like like I think it's truly is like it creates an environment where people aren't afraid to sort of be accepting, and it like makes a much more inclusive environment. Because like at the end of the day, I mean, first of all, I mean, a lot of the accommodations you ask for are accommodations that they're going to give you anyway, like having your own private thing, everyone being quiet when you do your job. And in a lot of ways, being an actor, I think, is a very, good for autistic people. And maybe, and I do know, actors that aren't open about it, but who do have diagnoses and just don't want to mention it because they're afraid of being typecast. They're very successful. And I think that's because of the whole thing. But I mean, I often wonder how many of like the quote diva stories that they have of like actresses who like won't come out of their trailer are really just undiagnosed you know, autistic people, probably some of them, but like not all of them, but like, do you know what I mean? Like, so like there is like an element where there's a little bit more of like, okay, well, it's an actor that, you know, they're giving, you know, that they sort of expect that you might be quirky in some way. So I think that helps.
Yeah. From the inside, when I see, I've been in on a number of development meetings, mostly the check-in meetings rather than the meetings where actual development is going on, where they'll bring in the whole team, they'll talk about a project and where it is, what are the hot topics, what are issues where they might need a lawyer, because that's my job. And so I get to see a lot of the people who are putting together a project, talking about that project all at once. And when there is something, a character in a project that doesn't speak to their personal experience, there is certainly, in my experience, a tendency to want to be good and want to accommodate and to recognize that there may be needs that they don't know about. But without the intervention of somebody like Alex to step in and say, here's what you could expect, or here's what's going to happen, they have to kind of figure it out on the fly. Somebody with Rick's point of view, you know, kind of can help them in that process, but they also are well aware that consultants are important when they're reaching for something beyond their experience, and that there is an interest in doing that. So I feel like
Can I interrupt real quick
Mhm.
just to give one more example of a question?
Absolutely.
Like, I got asked a question the other day by, you know, when I, you know, gave my talk, and it was, I forget who it was. I think it was an AD in one of the, and he hit, I think his question was like, well, like, what if we need to do an insert? Like, you know, is that something we can announce and say, hey, we're going to do an insert? And I was like, well, she's an actress. You know, you're working with an actress who's been on sets before. I'm pretty sure she'll be okay if you need to do an insert. But, you know, to them, it was like, oh, we have to like tiptoe around, you know? And it's just like, that was a misconception that was, you know, then sort of taken care of at the, you know, before they got on set and there was a situation where they felt uncomfortable, you know, or felt less than.
Yeah. There's a question that came in about when a role has a particular disability, does the actor have to have that particular disability? And again, from the inside, I can see, especially over the last 5 years, there has been a strong interest in doing the best to match. The days of Hank Azaria playing Apu seem to be largely behind us. And I have also seen the same kinds of things when it comes to autistic roles. There really isn't any question if there's an autistic role that they're at least, the presumption is it will be filled with an autistic performer. The question is, I guess, how closely will it match? And this is specifically a question from Amy. She was asking about Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And I think there is a real serious effort to try to get as specific as you can and to go out of your way to, if you've got a non-speaking autistic character, to not just cast an autistic performer to play that role, but to cast a non-speaking autistic person to play that role. When we did the voiceover panel a couple weeks ago, actually when we did a different panel about 2 months ago, there was a talk about the extensive process of, in an animated role, trying to cast a non-speaking performer to play the voice role of a non-speaking role. So there really is an interest in trying to match. It's hard to say exactly how closely you match. And sometimes I think what casting directors find is they cast the net for the role with a particular set of circumstances for that role in mind. And then if they find the actor that they love, they might change the role to account for the particularities of the performer. I suspect that, you know, Rick, you've talked about that a little bit, that you'll bring that to their attention and say, hey, this is something that I think would be helpful to the character to change. So, Kayla, I wanted to ask you. You have talked about how you tend to not ask for accommodations on set, but I suspect that means it's because you've prepared yourself in advance to not ask. So I'm curious about scheduling. You know, how do you prepare in advance? What scheduling issues have you had with relation to your autism? Do you give yourself more time to prep? Do you book yourself for shorter sessions? How do you handle that part of it?
Well, I haven't encountered any problems myself working long hours on set. I consider it my determination to demonstrate my capabilities to be just as capable as a neurotypical actor. I see it when you book a role, you sign a contract, it's a job commitment, period. If you need more time to prep, that means no sleep, skip sightseeing, nights out, days out, stay wherever you're staying and study and fully commit yourself to the project because they are expecting you to commit to the project. Taking extra breaks can slow down production. So you have to manage your time wisely. I always prep as much as I can in advance. I could have anywhere from over 100 lines for next week. So my weekends are always studying for the next week. And that might guarantee me a few extra hours of sleep during the week. But again, it's no guarantee because scripts can change in the blink of an eye and you have to be prepared for that. But there's no way to be prepared for that. You have to be prepared for the unexpected.
I think those are all great points. You know, these are jobs and there are schedules, and you can ask for reasonable and should ask for reasonable accommodations, but you got to remember the word reasonable, right? And some of those accommodations, as Kayla, you're describing, you make on your own. It might take you longer to, I don't know, rest or learn lines or whatever your particular situation is, but that's going to be the same with a non-autistic performer. So it feels like part of what you're saying is that you need to know yourself, you need to know your needs. And if they are related to your autism, that's fine, but it's still your responsibility to account for it as best you can, in the same way that it's a production's responsibility to make reasonable accommodations. If they're going to cast a person who uses a wheelchair, they probably ought to have ramps and be mindful of where they're laying their cables. It takes both sides to account for it, and it's definitely your job as an actor. I'm curious, Alex, what are some of the most successful ways that you've seen autistic performers and productions that are casting them set up communications?
What are the most effective ways that I've seen productions set up communications? I mean,
and what are some that haven't worked too? You know, where you come in and you're seeing them setting up things that are going to hurt them in the long run or in the short run.
They're going to hurt them. I would say that oftentimes in casting, I think that, I've found that you really need to be careful with the way that you talk to autistic actors, especially, younger ones, because, they're used to sort of masking. So a lot of times, like, the director will want them not to mask. And I think that the way to sort of go about that is by making them feel comfortable, not trying to tell them not to mask. Because
Could you give an example of something? Could you give an example of something that was being masked that a director said don't? You're talking performance. What is that? What do you? Yeah, give an example of that.
Yeah, so like they were auditioning, an actor, and they wanted him to. They were sort of thinking that all these kids weren't autistic, because, and this was for Ezra, because they weren't showing as many signs of autism, and I had to sort of show them, clips of myself as a kid being, doing stimming stuff, and then other clips of me not, to sort of understood that, okay, well, they're trying to get the role. They're in their head, they've been sort of drilled into them from a young point, like that stimming is bad and that like they shouldn't show the autism stuff. So like the example I gave was, perhaps instead of telling them you should stim here, sort of get them comfortable, and then they'll be more likely to stim, and then you can sort of get them to, then you can notice what the stim is, and then
what makes somebody comfortable,
like instead of, like when I said before, rocking, instead of rocking, if someone's doing something with their glasses or something, that's a stim, then try to get them to do that if you want them to stim in that scene. Does that make sense? Sort of like. I'm trying to answer your question.
Yeah, pardon me for interrupting this, but I guess I'm still curious because, like, if somebody's coming into audition, you don't know what their personal character traits are. So if they're not rocking or they are rocking or whatever, but you want them to feel comfortable, you can't say, do that thing with your glasses. You don't know how they really handle themselves. I think more what you were saying is make them feel comfortable and safe so they could show up authentically, but how could you
Yeah.
do that in an audition with somebody? Like if somebody were going for an audition, you're already nervous. What do you do? Is there something you could say, hey, like, bring some of your authentic self to this. If there's any things that you do, you don't have to hide them. Like, I guess I don't understand how you could do that.
That's the thing. Like saying that makes them more aware of it and makes it less likely for them to do it. So it's more of just sort of letting them display it. I hope that sort of answers it. Because like if you think about it, like if you talk about like stims, like unless you're, once you're on set and you're already in the moment, like that, you're used to doing it, like, okay, sure. But if you're in an audition, like talking about stims is going to make someone stop stimming. Like if you say, oh, I love the way that you like do that weird thing with your teeth, you're going to stop doing the weird thing with your teeth. So something like, but like when you're neurotypical, like I feel like they think that that's like that's the way you're supposed to talk to autistic people. It's really like a case by case basis, I would say. And this was sort of a specific example, but like, yeah, I mean, I found that for me, at least, like for auditions, like what you said, like that chip thing would have been great for an audition, honestly, if someone had been eating chips right before the audition, right? Like getting yourself into a space where you're in that position to be in that same state of mind kind of helps.
Yeah, and I think, Alex, you're even just the conversation you guys just had shows that it's complicated, right? That it really is difficult, so that even a well-intentioned casting director or production is still going to have their challenges. If they've written that their character stims in a particular way, they may not have the language even to know what to ask
yeah,
for.
And there's this level of sort of stubbornness that you would expect from someone like me, where it's like, autistic, and like where it's like, no, he's got to rock. Like it's like, okay, but why? They're like, well, they don't have an answer to that that's sufficient. But I think that
I was agreeing and a counterpoint to that. There are things that I've seen written or asked of or in direction that are more so to help what they believe is to help this character sell a certain point of view or character trait. And then the other version is it's a story point. If there is something that is like, another scene, this character is talking about how they saw this person rocking and they thought this, or this, it's necessary. So like, there are some times where you could find that collaboration to where, hey, we could still keep some type of a stim, but could it be this instead? But like I've had directors talk to me about like, hey, you're basically indirectly asking me to speak more robotically. And it's like, I mean, if we're creating this show now in episode 1, and this is something that you think is important for this character, we could have that conversation. But with different directors come in, it's like, basically that's not autistic enough, or that's too autistic. And it's like those types of things. There's like, is this based on your projections and understandings of, and your experiences with people, neurodiverse people, or is this a story point? And I think sometimes people don't realize it's not a story point. They just want you to be something.
That's a really interesting way to look at it. The question from David came in about, what happens when a performer is either, to use your words, right, not autistic enough or too autistic. Alex, how have you helped a production have a more thoughtful approach to the expression of a particular character's autism?
It's really just a matter of sort of getting them to get over their sort of preconceived notions of like, oh, well, this guy's gonna have trouble. I mean, like, I think that they come into this thinking this is going to cost us money. It's going to slow down production. And then, by the end of it, they're like, oh, this kid is, or, this actor is really amazing. They should be in more things, but then, a lot of times we're typecast because they don't realize that like, this is not some weird, like, person that's different from you. It's just like a natural variation in the human condition that should be expressed on screen in a way that sort of tells stories that are universal.
Yeah, and I think, Kayla, that brings us to a question that a lot of people ask, which is about playing non-autistic roles as an autistic performer. I just kind of want to ask you, Kayla, about to what extent do you perform autistic and non-autistic roles? And I really just want to know your thoughts on the prospect.
I perform both autistic and non-autistic roles by choice. I don't want it to be limited to just autistic roles when I'm capable of doing both. I want to be challenged across the board in any role that I take on, physically able to do any stunt, learn dialect, learn a new skill, take on physical transformation, be emotionally and mentally challenged with any project that I take on. But think about it, how many of us mask or used to mask? It's acting. It's being somebody else.
Yeah. And so when do you disclose your autism? You've been fairly public about it, but at what point in the process now, but also earlier in your career, when you were starting out, would you tend to disclose?
My first project, it was an autistic role, so I came out right away for more inclusion. But something you have to understand is that 99% of my auditions are for neurotypical characters. So out of 250 neurotypical auditions a year that I do, I only get on average 2 to 3 autism related character auditions each year. Most of the time, the casting directors reach out to my team directly because I'm already a known autistic talent that's proven themselves. And I generally only disclose my autism only when the character is explicitly identified in the script or the audition breakdown as autistic, or it's one of those scripts where the character shows clear traits associated with autism, but the autism is never exactly mentioned or brought up in the script.
Like in The Accountant. I always think of that.
Well, sorry, I did that with non-authentic casting. So sorry, but yes.
Yeah, and then Kayla, yeah, I'm just curious while you're on the topic about your thoughts about non-autistic performers playing autistic roles. And I realize that's a little different between now and 10 years ago. Things are changing, but how do you feel about it now?
I mean, it's very hard when there's so few opportunities for autistic actors, and there are autistic talent out there, and casting directors knows how to reach these talent, but yet they cast a neurotypical actor. And yet by doing this, they know they will receive backlash if they cast it non-authentically. It's kind of like a given this day and age. If you cast it on it authentically, you're going to get bombarded with Twitter and social media, everyone commenting like you could have casted somebody authentic. So it's a big no-no, but it's still done. I just feel like Hollywood still wants us to prove ourselves that we're capable of those higher roles, like the accountant, like Rick mentioned, or the Big Bang Theory, Sheldon. I just feel Hollywood wants us to keep proving ourselves to the point where we don't have to worry about non-authentic casting anymore. Like, I have seen improvement, but I still have done auditions where it's gone to a non-autistic actor, and I'm just like, sometimes I feel they call us in for what's the word, for moral reasons. Like, okay, we auditioned autistic actors for this autistic role, but we went neurotypical, but we still auditioned them. So we did try, but it's just.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine from the inside what could correct that. The public pressure, I think, is really useful in helping change things on the inside. But I think about the NFL and the Rooney Rule, where they had so many white coaches disproportionate to the players, and they instituted a rule, I don't know, 30 years ago that said if you have an opening for head coach, you must interview at least one minority coach candidate. And then they did that for a while and had a small improvement. So then they continued to work that process to expand the types of interviews and to start internship programs and to really recognize that there was an issue and that there were institutional ways of addressing it. I think Hollywood is just touching on that now, maybe in the last couple of years, as it relates to autism. And hopefully things like autism and entertainment and exceptional minds are the kinds of things that will bring attention to it, so that maybe, and and frankly, the work that we're doing behind the scenes, when you talk to people individually, maybe that can evolve it in the right direction. There's a question for Kayla and Rick and Alex. I believe you've been an actor as well. Can you tell us about the first acting job you got and how you got it? I guess we've heard Kayla's. Kayla,
Well,
but
yeah,
yours is pretty amazing.
yeah. I booked Everything's Gonna Be Okay in 2018. At the time, it was my first year in LA. I did not have an agent or a manager. No one would meet with me, but I saw a nationwide casting call go out for the role of Matilda for a freeform pilot, and the button wasn't working on the casting website. So I called the casting office expecting to be hung up on, because that's what happens when you call a casting office and they're not expecting your call. They hang up. And I just said, wait, the button is not working and I really want to submit for this role. Can I please get your direct email address and I'll self-submit everything you ask for there. And then they called me in like the next week, and I ended up doing 3 months of callbacks, network tests, studio tests, executive tests, and ended up booking the role out of a nationwide casting call without an agent or a manager.
It's amazing, Rick.
Well, I had done a few commercials before my first gig, but I do consider my first job to be a TV show. And I also didn't have an agent. Kind of had a manager. I don't really know if I did or not, really. Somebody that I knew that was a manager. But the show creator, Bill Lawrence, was out watching stand-up. And he saw me do stand-up. And I remember he said to me, I still sometimes am a little untraditional with my stand-up, but then I was very experimental and did some things where I didn't even realize there was that unconventional. And I remember Bill, the first thing he said to me, came up to me and he said, I love how comfortable you are in uncomfortable moments. And I remember knowing that that was a compliment, but was confused with what was so uncomfortable. I was just up on stage joking, like everyone knows I was joking, and they didn't. People thought it was weird, and they didn't know I was joking because they didn't know who I was and what my intentions were. But he liked that, and I thought, I realized, you don't have to necessarily even like what I do. But if you are willing to at least question it, I think those are the types of people that are kind of advocates and champions, where they're like, why'd you do that? What are you doing? And then he said, he asked me to audition. I never had a TV show audition before. But back to the point I kind of made earlier, which is, even though he's a friend of mine now, he wasn't then, but it was still somebody that got to know me through an audition, through a short that you make. Whenever anybody asks, like, what do I do to get started? I don't know, but what I do not understand how people get jobs. Like, Kayla, what you did, you literally were like, you were cold calling people. You decided to be a salesperson to get a job. I mean, you have to find something. For me, my thought is, I do stand up, and at the time I was making sketches on YouTube and stuff. And like, to have something that people could see of yours, that you could sell them, whether it's you literally cold calling and selling them or showing them this stand up or this thing, letting them see you as not just the character that they have expectations for that you may or may not hit, but to show them that like you have a skill set and maybe you have more. But like, I remember somebody once told me, which I thought he made it up, but I know it's now it's saying, you need to prove to people that you could walk and chew gum at the same time. And like, people don't know that you could do that until you show them that. And however you want to show them that. But just people hire people, when given the option, they want to hire the most talented or the best looking or the most believable, whatever it would be, the most authentic. But I think what supersedes that business acumen and morality thing is a more human level. If people want to hire people that they like, whether it's a friend or somebody that seems nice or somebody that seems interesting or somebody that seems, whatever the thing might be, And even if you require certain things that might make production more expensive or curious, if you like this person, you want to work with them. And the obvious way of being likable is being nice and kind. But I do also think speaking directly and asking questions, not being afraid to ask questions, showing them, oh, this person wants to do a good job as opposed to this person wants the job, is a pretty good way of being liked. And
Yeah.
most of the jobs I've gotten, I think, are from not the audition, but from somebody liking me from something or meeting me and being like, I used to be very uncomfortable bringing in headshots because sometimes they ask for a headshot and sometimes they don't. And I would bring a headshot and I would give it to, and I remember once I gave it to somebody and I'm sure it was just a miscommunication, but they were like, what do you do? Like, we have your picture here. I don't know why you need my picture, but so I used to get embarrassed by bringing headshots. So I would do jokes all the time. I would bring in fake headshots or silly things, not for right or wrong, but I do know there were times it would get laughs and people, I had a commercial audition where my headshot is of David Schwimmer, but it has my name. And I gave him that and I didn't get the commercial, but the guy, I got a job later and he said, we didn't think you were right for this, but we loved your headshot thing. We had to give you something. And just like, I don't know, doing jokes, being likable.
Yeah,
Alex, we're winding down the last couple minutes, but Alex, I'd love to hear, how you got your first acting job.
That's actually my story is sort of piggybacks on that. I was working as a consultant on a TV show called The Bridge on FX that starred Diane Kruger. And so we would have table reads every week. And, I guess that, every week they would have, the parts that hadn't been cast, they would just, give a little note card to someone to read that part. And I never got to do that. So it was the last episode of the season. I was like, hey, can I read a part? And they're like, they look through and they're like, oh, they're all given out. And they're like, well, actually there's one that's like one line, but you probably don't want that, do you? And I said, no, I want that. So and so we got, and it was partway through the thing, and it's the thing where Matthew Lillard's like a reporter, and I come in to hand him something, and I say the line, it's this came for you, and then the whole room erupts in applause and cheers, and Matthew Lillard says, you should play the part, and I said, well, don't you need network approval for someone like me to play the part? And they're like, and then one guy says, oh, I work at the network. I'm an executive at FX. I approve it. And then I said, well, I'm not at the actors. And then someone else was like, oh, well, we can just Taft-Hartley. And that was sort of how I got my first role. And it turned into a recurring role, which unfortunately the show got canceled. But then I, did The Good Doctor. And then I got a role in Ezra, the movie that I was most recently working on.
Great movie.
Thank you. And the only reason I got it is because I just asked the director, Tony Goldwyn, who's an actor himself, hey, can I audition for this part? And I didn't get the part that I auditioned for, but he ended up giving me this other part that was just a doctor that, had an exchange with Bobby Cannavale, sort of confronting him in the hospital, which was cool because, it was, as you said, it's not like a quote autistic part, but in a way it's an autistic part because I was an autistic actor playing a doctor. Sort of like, I think that, one of the shows, there's a show called Master of None that there was an episode called like Indians on Television that really resonated with me because it sort of paralleled my experience where I felt like, he kept getting asked to do the Indian accent to play the cab driver, et cetera. I sort of felt a similar sort of thing, different, but because it's not race, but like, disabilities or playing the quote autistic, you're not autistic.
The idea of asking for things is just, I mean, Kayla cold called, you asked, could I do this? Just ask for stuff. And then like you said, Britton, they could say no.
Yeah.
But
so what? Worst case scenario, they say no and you didn't lose anything.
Always ask.
So we're down to the last minute. I want to thank Kayla, Alex, and Rick for being involved. I feel jittery because you guys, all three of you, worked on the projects that really have been meaningful to me as a parent of an autistic kid, and seeing the journeys that you guys shared in your TV shows and in the movie Ezra all resonated in different ways with me. So I'm trying to keep cool, but I'm actually super excited to be talking to the three of you guys. We're going to formally end the call. Let anybody who has to go, Rick, Kayla, and Alex, if you need to go. I can stick around for another 10 or 15. I imagine we can keep open the line and, continue the conversation. But I wanted to formally thank you guys. Thank Judy Utah for putting it together. We're going to do another one of these in September for writers. So if you're an autistic person who is interested in becoming a writer, that might be something that you would enjoy watching. And but I want to formally thank you, and to anybody who has to go, I want to say goodbye. And this is how they applaud in my kid's school, so that's the way I want to do it here too.
Thank you
Question,
so
though,
much.
do you
Love
want
it.
us to stay to answer questions? I can. As I said, I do apologize because I have this toothache that I have to go pick up amoxicillin for, so I can stay
Yes.
a little longer, but I do have to go to
Stay as long
Walgreens
as you
at some
can.
point.
I can only stay
Weren't you
about 10
supposed to get
minutes.
that? Weren't you supposed to get that checked at? Oh, are you on the West Coast? Because an hour and a half. Don't you want to go at 2:30? Tooth hurty.
Oh, I'm with you. I love that one. That's the best time to see the dentist.
Does anybody have any questions about puns? Also, I'm sorry about your tooth. That sucks.
While you guys are asking questions, I just want to start up a poll. This is the Autism and Entertainment Conference was paid for through a grant from the Department of Developmental Services, and we have a ton of data to report, and not everybody has responded to my surveys. So I'm going to just post one up. If you attended the conference, you can answer it. And just take you a minute. And in the meantime, you can continue to ask questions and hopefully you can all multitask. So I'm going to just open that up and then
You're on an
continue.
autistic conference and you're asking people to multitask.
I know, I'm pushing.
Hopefully everybody here is
look,
good at
there it is.
executive functioning.
Yes. And so also there were a couple of questions that got asked that we're going to try and answer offline. You know, one of the questions about a list of accommodations that you might ask for, I think that'd be interesting to try and put together a list. These are some fairly common accommodations that people can ask for, because a lot of times performers don't even know something that might bother them. I heard an anecdote about the set for Ezra about trying to avoid having too much dust in the air. And if you took this particular not too difficult accommodation, that would limit that, which would then make it easier for the autistic performer who is asking for it to, you know, handle the room. Also, organizations that help with self-advocacy, particular agents and managers who are good with autistic performers. So I can address that question about agents and managers. I know of one in particular, Melissa Berger-Brennan, who is a rep that I've worked with through Nickelodeon, largely with kid performers, but she's also very interested in working with performers who are autistic and has been for a couple of years. So I know she's at the very least open to it, and she's lovely. But there are certainly going to be others who have a particular area of interest. And then Danielle Pretzfelder-Demchik is a casting director based in New York who also specifically tries to open doors for people who are not neurotypical or who maybe have special needs. So she's also focused on helping those people find roles as she's the casting director. She's sort of a go-to casting director for that. And then let's see how. Yeah. And then, so something we didn't get to talk too much about was the disclosure. I guess Rick, it didn't seem like it was that much of an issue for you about disclosing autism. It seems like you've been generally pretty open with that. And it sounds like you've had pretty good responses to being open about any questions or
pick and choose. I do pick and choose when I discuss it. I actually talk about it more now since the show as we see it than I did before, when I realized how many other people feel the same way, that they don't necessarily want to talk about it, for whether they feel it might be a burden or they feel they'll be questioned or they'll feel they'll be talked to differently. I definitely don't have any shame about talking about it. It's just about finding when is it worth it. And I like a turning signal. When in doubt, communicate. Sometimes I don't necessarily communicate specifically autism, but what needs I might have that might be related to it. Sounds, textures, smells is a big one, where I say I'm very sensitive to these things. But it's not just about disclosing autism. It's just about not everybody wants to talk to you about what their sexuality is. Some people really want to talk to you about it. Sometimes you might, sometimes you don't. I had brought up being Jewish earlier as a way to make a little bit of a joke, but to relate in a certain way. Like, whatever you want to disclose, feel free to check in with your intentions. But if you want to disclose it, then disclose it. If you don't, I would also argue to check in with your intentions of why you don't want to. But
have you ever walked away from a project, Rick, that whether they wanted you or not, where maybe you just read a breakdown of it or something? But
I was offered this show, Not Dead Yet. It was an ABC show that just ended, but we did 2 seasons, and the character was autistic. And though I didn't think I was necessarily going to walk away, I was considering it based off of if they were going to need me to play the same type of autism that I had played. And like I said, there's just, not for right or wrong, my own personal thing. I don't mind playing multiple autistic characters. I want to be able to do both, just like Kayla said. But there did feel like a lot of the autism I see is either with obstacles that lack independence, or that on the other end of the spectrum that could be savants and unbelievably magical. And like, I really wanted to be able to play an autistic character that wasn't so what I've seen.
Do you get auditions where, like, I would say, like, you have to, I feel like it's maybe it's like the Bechdel test, but for autism. If the character unprompted says the directions to his home or the subway station, like, it's like it's like not a good representation.
Well, and like
Or it's a representation you've already seen, right?
Yeah, yes, yeah.
But it's either a wrong representation or it's a representation we've already seen. You know, let's expand the palette.
And a lot of
I
times
mean, it's like stereotype.
Yeah.
The people that are writing it oftentimes understand it from things they have seen before. And this isn't just about neurodiversity. This is about anything that somebody isn't. Talking about a culture of a Black person, of a Jewish person. Those are the big two. But like anything that like you don't know what it is, the chances are they don't want it a certain way because that's what's best. That's just like, if you're writing a legal drama, you're going to probably want to get
AA meeting.
Yeah. You want to hire, that's why I think the consultant is such a great thing, because it's not just about representation and authenticity in representation, which is important, but it's also about, don't you want this project to have a specific, honest, real voice? And hiring somebody that has a point of view that you don't have just benefits the project. And it's like the idea of like, should only neurodiverse play neurodiverse? I think that's a great conversation to have. Also, you know what? I'm going to be talking way too much on this. I know.
Well, Alex, I'm
sorry.
I want to ask you quickly. Maybe not quickly. I have a thing about wanting to see autism explicitly called out in kids' pop culture. I think it's important to hear the word autistic on screen, but I don't know that I'm right. So, Alex, I was kind of curious to get your point of view, and I'm gonna have to close my screen for just a sec, but I'm here. So please continue the conversation. Even though you can't see me.
I think it's important to show representations. I remember I was talking to a writer of a show called Boy Meets World, and I was telling him, oh, you know, that's how I learned social skills. I'm autistic. And he's like, oh, really? My daughter's autistic. And I was like, huh, I wonder if that's why I like the show so much, right? Because, you know, there's like this element of like, you see it when someone's, I mean, they didn't have a daughter back then, but like, you know, maybe it's genetic, and he sort of identified some certain things, and you could see it in the voice of certain characters. But I think that, like, in terms of having it mentioned, like, it has to be done, especially on a kid show, in a way that doesn't like create like this othering. And that's always like, and that's part of why you really do need like writers and directors who are autistic too, and producers on set who are like, actually have a say in what's going to happen. Because like, if you're just going to give your notes and then they're going to use some and not use others, and it doesn't actually change the direction of the piece to actually do what the notes were intending, then it doesn't really have as much of an impact as you would hope.
Britton's taking a poop right now, I think. Can I say that?
I think you did. I mean, I heard you.
Well, authentically, you know, some people as neurodiverse and neurotypical sometimes have to poop. Now, oh, be cool. He's back. You're muted.
I'm gonna be remote. I was gonna hang up so I could go pick up my kid from Code Ninjas. I don't know if
from the pool.
Well, but instead I'm gonna close my screen but keep talking and listening while I drive. But I don't mean to interrupt. Well, I'm not gonna look at the screen. That's why I blank out my screen. What was
thanks for the laugh.
What was your short version of the answer, Alex? Was it yes, it's important to see the word, or not so much?
I said that I think that you should have as little autism as possible. That we don't want to be known about. We're like,
No, he's playing
You know,
Mr.
like-
Feeney. He said that you have to do it where it doesn't other people. Come on, Alex. He's got to pick up the kids from
I
the
think
pool.
that's fair. I think that
what did
feels
they
fair.
say? Plastics?
What's that mean?
Plastics.
Like from The Graduate?
That was a reference to plastics. Isn't that what he said in The Graduate?
I don't know, Alex, but I'll tell you something. I think we're bombing right now. Sean's the only one liking what we're doing.
No, that's very
Oh,
good
they
taste.
did say everyone should disconnect. Well, what do I mean? by
I'm
plastics?
actually about to go now.
Yeah,
yeah.
I do have
Last-
to go to
And
the.
he's
Yeah,
Alex is
then,
too.
then let's wrap it up.
Thank
So,
you
so-
all for joining us.
appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
Yeah, thank you all very much for hosting the
Thanks,
conference.
Rick.
It
Thanks,
was very helpful.
Alex. Fantastic job. Join us again in September.
All right, bye. I'm
Take care.
disconnecting now.
Bye.
Have a great day. Thank you for hosting. Bye.
bye, guys.